like always, when I begin, first of all, I'm so happy this is happening because I'm fascinated by the topic. So let's go to the beginning. Tell us about yourself, first of all, and a bit of your background before we continue with the introduction.
Yeah, so my background is in philosophy, and I am currently a visiting instructor in the Cornerstone program at Purdue University. And my area of specialization is in early modern philosophy, Spinoza, and metaphysics. And my research focuses around metaphysical rationalism, modality, essentialism, the mind-body problem, and free will. So I was pleased to have your invitation to come onto the podcast and discuss my paper on free will and the principle of sufficient reason.
Well, I'm so happy that we have finally the newly graduated, I should say, congratulations on your order.
Thank you.
And so what got you interested in philosophy? Because in my mind, so far, I haven't been able to really pin down most people who had this intention early on of ending up in philosophy. What kind of moved you to philosophy? Give us a little background. It can be as personal as you wish. And then why philosophy of religion also, besides the other expertise that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I got interested in philosophy, I think through philosophy of religion initially. Very interested in different conceptions of God and the attributes or whatever God is like. So that was my fascination, I think, through undergrad. But also through undergrad, I was introduced to a lot of early modern thinkers like Descartes and Leibniz and Spinoza. And Spinoza in particularly, he fascinated me most, so much that I eventually, decided to go on and do my research primarily on him and his necessitarianism, or his denial that there is contingency, and his conception of the world and the universe seems so fascinating to me. And he also provides an alternative conception of God to the typical theistic source that we find in the monotheisms. So I've always been attracted to that, but also attracted to what research is going on in atheism and philosophy and different conceptions of naturalism and how to understand that. And Spinoza seems to have this interesting combination of a lot of interesting things of theism and a lot of interesting things about naturalism, and somehow brings them together in a way that is, I guess, overlapping with atheism, but overlapping with theism, but somehow being neither or both, depending, I guess, on how we look at it.
Right, and I should say, this is a welcoming addition when it comes to, I think, rediscovering a really key figure. Like, I like Spinoza. I'd love to see more written about him, and also more being incorporated into different axiologies, naturalism. So I know that one of the last people that is actively trying to do that and to kind of bring some sort of connection to that is Erich Steinhardt. And his latest book was really interesting for me, Believing in Dawkins. And he's trying to kind of sift through the issues and form a kind of Platonic naturalism or something. And he has another forthcoming book with some relevant observations, I think, to Spinoza. So I'm really glad that things are being rediscovered and not dismissed as much, especially now that I think there has been some sort of a recovery from the old, and the anger shouting matches of the new atheist and so on. So I think the dust has settled, and we will be seeing more progress. I'm a bit more optimistic than other philosophers maybe on that front, but that brings us to one of your main areas of expertise, and we're here to discuss. And that includes many figures, Leibniz, Spinoza, or even if you're kind of interested within an Islamic tradition, you have Avicenna who uses the same version.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really important. But before jumping in, we want to have some idea. So please give us some idea of what PSR is before we jump in.
Sure. The PSR, also known as the principle of sufficient reason, it's a very controversial but very interesting principle in philosophy and in the history of philosophy. It comes in a variety of different versions, but I suppose the simplest version, and the devil might lie in the details, it will be formulated as every fact has an explanation. That's the basic idea. Or every truth will have a sufficient reason. And how you cash those things out, those details, what is a sufficient reason, what is an explanation, you start to generate different versions of it. But the basic idea of the PSR is that every fact has an explanation, or some set or subset of facts have an explanation, depending on who we're talking to. But it's had defenders as early as ancient Greece. We see Parmenides seem to formulate some version of the principle of sufficient reason. Throughout history, there seem to be appeals to causal explanation that might be a principle of sufficient reason, and most famously, Spinoza and Leibniz seem to adhere to some version or other of the principle of sufficient reason. More or less, they're committed to the world being an intelligible realm where everything admits of an explanation of some sort. There's no brute facts, where brute facts are understood that there are facts that they're true, and there's no reason or explanation for why they are so. So they're committed to the complete denial of brute facts in nature, which is just, another way of thinking about the PSR.
Right, and there seems to be some sort of renewed interest in principle of sufficient reason, or for short, PSR. So any mention, any interesting things happening in the most recent literature? Maybe give us a few hints in what you said, that how it is being cashed out.
Yeah, so if we're thinking of recent history of PSR, Peter Van Inwagen and Jonathan Bennett in the 80s, roughly around the same time, and I think they were both at the same university, Syracuse, the same time, working on arguments that show or seek to show that PSR is incompatible with the view that things are contingent. They want to say that if we're really committed to the view that everything has an explanation, what you're going to end up having to deny is that there are such things as contingent facts. So if you think that things could be otherwise, that it's possible for the world to be one way, even though that's not the case, then you're going to have to end up rejecting those sorts of facts, because the explanation of that fact will sort of necessitate things to be a certain way. And no matter how far back you go in that explanatory chain, it's all just going to end up being links of necessitation. And so they argued that if you are committed to the PSR, you're going to have to reject contingency. But they thought, both of them seemed to suggest, especially Van Inwagen, that what you should end up doing is just reject the PSR and assume and stick to your guns, as it were, that things can be otherwise and that there's contingency. So this, I guess, renewed some interest in the PSR, at least as a devastating, or perceived to be a devastating blow to the PSR. Most people shortly after that assumed for quite some time that the PSR is necessarily false. It's an absurd principle because of the implications it has. But sometime later, Alexander Pruss and some other philosophers began formulating weaker forms of the principle of sufficient reason. So instead of just saying that everything has to have a sufficient reason, they began saying only certain things require an explanation, or certain facts, not all facts, require some sort of an explanation. And they try to show how you can avoid that sort of necessitarianism where everything ends up being necessary. They try to show you can hold to PSR and without being committed to everything being necessary. And there's also been renewed interest in the PSR because of work like Alexander Pruss's, in that it seems to show or lead to the existence of a first cause or God based on their cosmological arguments. And you can see in the philosophical literature that there has been indeed an explosion of research and renewed interest in not only the cosmological arguments, but PSR and its other implications too. So there's an exciting amount of research that has entered the scene really in the last 10 or so years, 10, 20 or so years on the principle of sufficient reason. So it's a good time to get into this line of research.
This is the time for PSR. I mean, I've actually came across a few people telling me that the reason they kind of were, as ethicists, seeing this to be attractive is because for moral realism, it just gets the job done a bit easier than trying to come up maybe with arbitrary or long-winded answers for different sets of explanations. Maybe it has an explanation at the end because of PSR, but right now I'm not in whatever epistemic situation that I might have been to give you the answer. So yeah, the applications are really interesting. So most of the time, I mean, especially when you're looking at apologetic literature, the voice and the opinion and the stance that some of them take is much more strong than what it seems to me to be the case. So oftentimes there are like two obvious labels for PSR. One is PSR is just obvious. Like it's obvious. And even if it's not obvious, it's a precondition of philosophizing or reasoning. But it sure seems to be self-evident. And do you think it's self-evident?
I suppose I don't know. That would be my deepest answer or my ultimate answer. But it does have that appeal and that allure. If it's not, or I'll say this: in one sense, it might be self-evident. In another sense, it's not. When I first heard of the principle of sufficient reason in undergrad, I was not convinced of its truth just upon someone explaining it to me in its most basic form. It wasn't immediately clear, but I was convinced by the principle of sufficient reason upon thinking about it, doing more research, reading more about the principle and what it means. And I'm less certain now of whether it's evident in that way, but so I would say it's not self-evident in that, like, if I just tell you what the principle is, you'll come away thinking it's true. But maybe it could be self-evident in that if you think about it, contemplate it, and try to figure out what it means, maybe. So I'm not quite sure what the what in fact is the what are we supposed to say about its self-evidence, but maybe. That would be my answer, I suppose.
Right. So there has been some sort of undercutting and rebutting the features, different versions to the PSR, and you kind of ran through the most important part, I guess, which was the whole spiel with Wagon. So I think this is like a really nice bridge to see that. So some say that contrary to what people who believe in PSR say, PSR does not seem to be supported by reflection on different cases. So such reflection would support maybe a weaker principle that objects and events are explained in terms of antecedent causes and conditions. But in actual practice, scientists explain the existence of objects and events in terms of antecedent causes and conditions. So provisionally taking latter things to be brute fact unless or until they will be explained too. So then there maybe can be further explained these sort of observations, but the principle implicit in this sort of search isn't sufficient to generate the need for an explanation of the universe, at least as a whole, to be some sort of, in terms of a necessary being. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that when we push, certain principles or ideas to the limits, it certainly starts to become a lot less clear, and the need to be more careful about how things work and what it implies. That's certainly a concern. So I think if we're thinking about the ultimate explanation for the universe, for example, when it comes to the PSR, it certainly should give, I think, someone pause about how the principle applies. It's certainly one thing to say that, I saw a leaf fall from a tree. There has to be an explanation for why that is. This is a common example that we can all see and observe, and indeed explain by reference to, law of gravity and initial conditions and whatnot. But it's another thing to talk about examples which we have no familiarity with, which, explaining universes as a whole.
The sort of thing that you're talking about, that, okay, maybe it doesn't apply to, like, you see a leaf and it's falling down or something, but the amount of puzzlement or your epistemic situation or the epistemic demand of certain facts that are calling out or crying out for explanation, I think, that would differ. Now, as to your point of them not, because you mentioned that maybe they aren't self-evident as like taking a proposition and then understanding it as a whole. But if you contemplate it, you will it. So let me just give some substance to it, and if you want to add to it.
Sure.
So we mostly took two standard categories of self-evident propositions: analytic a priori propositions, synthetic a priori. But these sorts of propositions are unknowable independently of empirical investigations. They differ in that analytical a priori propositions, are tautologous and uninformative. They don't tell us much. For example, all bachelors are unmarried. But nothing can be read all over and green at the same time is a synthetic a priori proposition. Now, if we think about PSR, for everything object, there is a sufficient reason why it exists, and a positive state of affair, there should be a reason for why it obtains. But this isn't a tautology, so it's not analytic a priori, and it's not understandable by reflecting on its constituent concepts. So then maybe the second distinction does not help it as well. So it seems that it's not self-evident. So would it be fair to say that in your case it would be mostly what you have in mind, some sort of an understanding that you can ponder its epistemic demands or virtues, or maybe explanatory heavy lifting of it, and came in to see its utility, and realizing that the price for dismissing PSR would be so hard and heavy that you would be imposing an explanatory poverty to yourself. Is that kind of the way you see it?
I think that's one way to see it. So you're getting at an interesting line of thought, which might be summarized, and you can tell me if this is wrong. Summarized as sort of like a pragmatic principle of sufficient reason. We're best off assuming that the PSR is true and that everything has an explanation, because if not, then we're going to be in some sort of a world of pain, philosophically speaking, like dealing with brute facts. Like we might not need to explain why some event happened and maybe, led to a certain number of deaths because it's just a brute fact. That would certainly be very undesirable. And this is one line of thought I've heard before. I can't think of anyone who's defended it off the top of my head, but there is some power to this idea of as I've called it, a pragmatic principle of sufficient reason. We're just better off assuming it true, which I suppose might leave some room for the possibility of there actually being brute facts, but it's just better to assume from the beginning that maybe there aren't, or assume that there aren't, and then just take it from there.
For people to come to accept PSR.
Sure. Yeah, I think it would be a good version for someone coming to the PSR interested in it. Just suppose it. It might even be an interesting exercise to suppose what things would be like if the PSR is false or were false. How would we deal with brute facts?
So. One thing is, obviously PSR is appealing to theists, so why is this appealing to theists, PSR? And it isn't only theists. Naturalists are also finding it appealing, some of them. So I know that Graham Oppy has a kind of necessitarian atheism or naturalism, as one would want to call it. And he has sort of, proper, I think it'd be weak, but sort of an PSR built in. So walk us through what you take to be the attractions for the theists and the naturalists here.
Well, for theists, I think the attractions, at least on the surface, are its usefulness, like the usefulness of the PSR to prove the existence of God, or at least the first cause of some sort. That would be, I think, the number one reason they prefer it. And, the reasoning typically goes that, the universe requires some sort of explanation, and the explanation isn't in the universe itself, so it must be external to the universe. And that external explanation is usually identified as God, some sort of necessary being. And it's, a handy argument to have if you're wanting to argue and justify theism. So I think that's the primary reason. I'm sure there are countless other reasons that theists would find the PSR attractive that I assume would overlap with what naturalists find appealing about the PSR as well. I haven't read as much from naturalists why they are interested in the PSR, but I would assume that it has to do with just perhaps maybe the reverence for science and the scientific explanation, and wanting to have explanations available for any given phenomena in the universe. This certainly seems to be a part of the scientific spirit of naturalism. So I assume it would have to do with that.
Right, and also let me add that epistemologically speaking, it seems to be advantageous in terms of Moorian shifts. So if you find yourself in some sort of skeptical situation, like say responding to the problem of evil, you might not take our epistemic landscape of facts to be representative of ontological facts that there are, and you could do a Moorian shift and you could say, I don't know, like, what could I point to say you're wrong, but the principle of sufficient reason at least gives me a reason to say maybe there are greater good reasons because of a PSR and we're just not in an epistemic position to understand it. And I think vice versa, it goes for the naturalist, something like that too. But one thing which was really interesting to me reading about PSR, because I'm returning to PSR like after quite some time. So I came across this really, I don't know, 2 or 3 lines in a paper that said maybe grounding is the new PSR. So what do you think of that? Do you think this is the kind of the new PSR? Because it's a lot of hype.
Yeah, there has been an explosion also of research into grounding and the nature of grounding, and there's a lot of different, from what I understand, a lot of different explanations of how grounding works. But it does seem to be some form of the principle of sufficient reason at work, or you could easily abstract that from all the grounding literature and the people who want certain things to be grounded in other things. And I find that fairly attractive too. I think if you formulate the PSR in terms of grounding, you'll end up with some interesting similar conclusions as you would with the classical PSR. And
I mean, it seems to me also, I should say, some sort of, I'm not sure how far I want to push this, but yeah, it seems to me to be explanatory advantageous. Now, one thing that PSR wants is a sufficient explanation. So when we're talking about explanations, the ideas really vary, but maybe for a starting point, we could kind of take it as it kind of removes mystery, or it is in the business of removing mystery. So what do you take to be a sufficient explanation, or what the literature on PSR typically takes to be the sufficient?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and if you bear in mind, what explanation is, or how are we supposed to cash out sufficient reason, then you're going to start to see all the different distinctions that defenders of PSR hold, and you'll see weaker versions and stronger versions. So the strongest version and the classical version held by like Leibniz and Spinoza seem to be sufficient reason as logically sufficient reason. There should be reasons that entail or necessitate the fact that you're explaining, such that given the sufficient reason, the fact must be the case. And so it's a very strong connection between the sufficient reason and the fact. This is where a lot of philosophers identify the issue with PSR generating necessitarianism, or the wholesale denial of contingency. So other philosophers weaken that link. They don't want necessarily a necessitating link between explanation and fact. They want something weaker, so they'll appeal to ideas roughly, I guess, similar to indeterministic explanation, where the facts are explained, but those facts don't guarantee the facts that they explain. They might cash out in a lot of different ways, but yeah, the idea is that the facts aren't necessarily guaranteed by the explanation, but they do explain it in this way that sort of dissolves the mystery around it. It's clears up any puzzlement that you might have. So that's a weaker form of the PSR.
So would it be fair to say that if someone's, I know, for example, after taking a look at Necessary Existence by Pruss and Rasmussen, I've looked at the reviews, and the point that RP made was kind of nice, I think. It was that, okay, sure, I mean, the weak principle is better. I think it's more virtuous. Lots of things going for it. But it implies the stronger version, or at least seems to be a step in at that direction, and why should I accept that? So what at this point is all hope lost, or are we back to the pragmatic reasons that for the intuition pump or kind of bringing the person to PSR? What do you think?
Yeah, I suppose if we maintain a pragmatic version of the PSR, you could couple that thesis with the idea that whenever you come up against like an objection or a brute fact or a candidate for a brute fact, maybe then you tweak the PSR that you are holding on the basis of what's pragmatic. So you might weaken it. Like you're like, oh, PSR leads to necessitarianism. So that's bad. That can't be true. So the person says, so they tweak the PSR so that it avoids that consequence while also maintaining, the idea that most things are intelligible or explicable, which has, the virtue of being a more or less common sense view and also in line with the scientific spirit that, things can be explained. So I suppose it might look a little ad hoc at that point, but I guess it would depend on the details of how this person would maintain this coherent, thesis.
Just add that I know that it was a conference on axiology of theism, and Liz Jackson from Ryerson University was putting forward an argument in defense of the axiology of theism, of how if the God exists, it would be better for the values of our world. And one of the considerations was that there would be no unexplained facts, and so building the PSR to that could also be something that is bidirectional. Like if you find yourself as a naturalist and you can implement that, get the axiological good out, and maybe if you're a theist. But for some reason, this idea didn't end up in, when I was attending the conference and Liz Jackson offered her paper, for some reason it didn't end up in the paper. I don't know. I might have I should follow up with her. But yeah, that seems to me like another reason maybe to give someone that axiologically it also does some heavy lifting in comparisons between words. So the other thing which you have to be clear on is the explanation. So we covered sufficient explanation, but now we have to know like the contrastive explanation. Are all explanations contrastive?
Okay, yeah. So that's a good question and a complicated one. The literature on contrastive explanation is pretty wide, but we can at least put out some of the basic ideas. So a contrastive proposition, firstly, is the idea that or in its basic form, contrastive proposition would be why Q rather than P, where Q and P are propositions. So if I said why did you order salad with your main course opposed to French fries? So that would be a contrastive proposition. The proposition that you ordered a salad rather than French fries. And when I ask why did you order a salad rather than French fries, then I'm demanding some sort of a contrastive explanation, an explanation of why the one is true, namely the order of salad, opposed to the other, the order of the French fries. And what we're doing, or what I suspect is basically operating in the background when you're demanding a contrastive explanation of why one thing is true rather than the other, is you're looking for there to be some relevant difference in the chains of explanation leading up to those two alternatives. One that would explain why you ordered salad and not French fries, but the difference in those causal antecedents that would elucidate and clear up that mystery of why you didn't choose French fry opposed to salad.
So, and the next part then was that, are all explanations contrastive?
Yes. So I actually don't know if that's, if all explanations are contrastive. It might depend on some of the details. So I'm inclined to think that a lot of contrastive explanation is a matter of perspective and depends on our epistemic situation. So we can get clear on, and I can make clear to other people I'm talking with, I can get clear on what facts am I getting at when we're having a discussion about what explains what. So by using contrasts, I can sort of narrow down the discussion so that I can point out that it's this fact or this aspect of a fact that I want explained. I want to know why you ordered salad rather than French fries. I'm not interested in why you ordered a salad rather than took a trip to Mars. Even though that latter statement is a contrastive one, it's not the one that's in issue. So there's like a context in which we're having a conversation, and I suspect that a lot of contrasts are a useful tool between interlocutors to sort of pinpoint what it is that's at issue and in discussion. If we think that explanations, objective and true explanations, are out there and we're sort of getting at them when we reason and explore science and whatnot, then it would be weird to think about how that would be contrastive. Or it would be interesting to think about how that would work. So I'm not sure if all explanations are contrastive, if that's clear.
And I also should point out that this is really complicated and heavy ground. So we just dip our toes in the water. We can't go deep. But for those maybe who are listening, you should check out Reasons Why from Bradford Scale. I think it's an Oxford published book. It's an amazing book, so give that a read. It's fantastic, I think. But the next thing we have to kind of talk about is the difference between contrastive explanations and contrastive propositions. So because that will be important for what's to come. So
well, the basic idea of contrastive proposition, as we've been saying, is a statement of the form, why Q rather than P, or why if you're ordering, food at a restaurant and you order a side of salad instead of French fries, a proposition of the contrastive sort would be that you ordered a salad rather than French fries. So a contrastive explanation would want an explanation of that contrastive statement or that fact. So you want to know why you ordered that salad rather than the French fries, and presumably the explanation would appeal to something like you enjoy eating salad more than French fries, or you value health better than being unhealthy. So that explains maybe why you chose the salad opposed to the French fries, which are not as healthy. And if you want to link that up to the Pruss paper, maybe we can set that up or bring the contrastive bits in after maybe making a few introductory remarks.
Okay, so finally we're in the heart of the discussion. I mean, all of this was to get to this, and this is where my interests lie. So we have someone, and I think a really smart individual. Like, I love Alexander Pruss, and also Josh Rasmussen. The list goes on, obviously. I mean, Dustin Crummett also. I mean, I love some stuff by him too. But this paper really caught my attention at the time that I was reviewing a debate, and the connection between PSR and the model of libertarianism that is central to theism. So first of all, give us an intro to the kind of PSR that Alexander Pruss had.
Yeah, so Alexander Pruss, a really smart guy. I admire his work as well. He defends a weaker version of the principle of sufficient reason than the ones that have been classically held by the likes of Leibniz and Spinoza. His version of the principle of sufficient reason maintains that every contingent true proposition or fact has an explanation. So he's not demanding that all propositions will have an explanation, including the necessary ones. He's sidestepping that, and he's just going to content himself to maintain the principle that only contingent facts require an explanation, where a contingent fact is a fact that we can think of as being, it's capable of being otherwise. There are some possible worlds where, in our world, it's a fact, but in that other possible world, it's not a fact. It could have failed to be true. Say that you ordered salad rather than French fries. So it'd be a contingent fact that you ordered the salad. Maybe in this other possible world, you ordered French fries.
And it seems to me, initially when I read the book, it was I was like, this seems to me to be a modest proposal. But now that I'm back to the book and I'm reading it, I'm not convinced as I was before. So one potential part of tension that Pruss himself is worried about, and you bring this out nicely in the paper, at least the fundamental part of the paper, is that there might be some sort of tension when it comes to the model of free will that he and most theists, I suppose, hold when it comes to the PSR. What is the tension, and why is he worried about that?
Yeah, so maybe we could put it in terms of, or by specifying what sort of free will is at issue here. So there's the debate on free will is also very broad, but two main positions in free will in the free will literature are the libertarian free will position and the compatibilist free will position. But whereas the compatibilists will say determinism is compatible with free will, hence the name of the position, compatibilism, the libertarian about free will say determinism is not compatible with free will, and they'll have some story to give that explains how free will works, and so will the compatibilist. But Pruss, Alexander Pruss, he wants to defend some version of the libertarian view that determinism is false. Not every event is going to have some sort of a sufficient cause or explanation. So the tension that arises between PSR and libertarian free will be to avoid the PSR from explaining too much, because there's the tension might come with PSR sort of demanding explanations that look increasingly deterministic. If there's this what looks to be a gap in your reasons or your behavior when you're freely choosing, the PSR will come in and say, we need an explanation for why you chose as you did. And the task for the libertarian who also holds PSR is how to explain free choices without explaining too much such that your choices become deterministic. So that might be one way to cash it out.
There seems to be such a thin line that you have to basically cash things out in terms to as not to give any hostage to the determinists from one side, and to those who would say, wait, this isn't motivated right. Why should I choose this as opposed to that? And this is how you kind of walk through and bring about the inexplicability problem. So before moving to that, is there anything that you want to add?
Nothing that I can think of right now.
Okay, so let's jump into the inexplicability problem, because that's like the heart of it. So if you want to basically have a takeaway from this episode, I think this should be it. Like, this is like the core principle and really appealing. We will be going to toy around a bit with this objection and apply it maybe to open theism and stuff later on. But let's just walk us through that, because
so what I call the inexplicability objection. It bears a lot of resemblance to what's also known in the free will literature as sort of the luck objection. So the luck objection to libertarian free will seeks to show that there's not maybe enough explanation to explain why one freely chooses, and because of that, it looks like the choice of the agent is random or up to luck. And that's usually taken to show that, okay, given the luck objection to libertarian free will, you can't be responsible for your choices because, you know, they're lucky or they're random. I want to maintain a similar argument, but a weaker one, where I'm not claiming that you can't be responsible for your choices given the argument, but really that the agent's choices aren't sufficiently intelligible or explicable given the demands for explanation from the PSR. And the explicability objection can be maybe explained in a simple way, which is, you know, suppose that we have a free agent and that they're making a choice, and suppose that they have two alternatives for the sake of simplicity. They can choose to, you know, do A, or they can freely choose to do B. And we can use that example we gave. You're at the restaurant and you freely choose to have salad with your main course, or you could freely choose to have French fries with your main course. You know, the choice is up to you. It's a free choice. And suppose that you choose to have salad with your main course. So if we take a step back from that, we see that there are two alternative courses of action for you to take. And if it's free, you know, it's up to you. In one scenario, you know, you choose the salad. So you have your reasons for choosing a salad. Maybe you think it's healthy. In the alternative situation, you choose to have French fries, and you have your reasons for that. Presumably, you find French fries delicious. So you do that. And we ask now in this situation, when it turns out that, say, you end up choosing to have salad, why is it that you chose to have salad? Why did you freely choose to have that rather than the French fries? So what explains this contrastive situation that we're in? What can be said for the libertarian to explain why the one is the case and the other one's not? You can't appeal to different events in the causal history of those situations. You can't, it doesn't look like appeal to different laws of nature, because by the nature of the case, it being a free choice, it's open at that moment before you choose salad or French fries. You know, there's no difference up to that point. So the question raised by the inexplicability objection is, well, we need an explanation here, but there doesn't seem to be one. If you say that you chose salad because you value health more than the tastiness of French fries, well, then we seem to have a contrastive explanation, but Pruss seems to want to deny that there can be something sort of tipping the scales in one direction over the other, because then it's not a paradigmatic free choice. So it's this being in a situation where you have two possibilities and you're equally disposed to one or the other, and then you end up choosing one. And while it may be random and lucky, I want to make the weaker claim that it's just not intelligible why you would choose one or the other. What would be intelligible is if you suppose there's not two choices, but a third one thrown in the mix, which is where you just find yourself incapable of making a choice. So if you are torn between these two possibilities of salad or French fries, it would be intelligible then that you fail to make a choice because both are equally attractive to you. You're impressed by reasons for each to an equal degree. So given the PSR, what we should say is that you would be torn between these two options and fail to make a choice. But that's a problem for some libertarian accounts like Pruss's, because he wants to say you can make free choices. If this were the case, then how could any free choices be made? You'd just be automatically torn between whatever options you have, because they're all equally pressing and equally possible.
Right, and you say your intention, and I think this comes at a nice place in the paper. Your intention is not to say that all contrastive propositions, as you said, it's much more modest than that, have to have a contrastive explanation. And what you do is you kind of put pressure on the PSR that Pruss has in mind, and it's like, wait a minute, we wanted to avoid brute facts, and it seems like if I push this enough, it seems we will end up with a brute fact of why the agent chose A rather than B.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and so this puts him in a position to either sort of go with his PSR and sort of break that stalemate between the two choices. You can't have cases where you choose one rather than the other when you are equally disposed to both. But if he's going to maintain that PSR in that sort of a case, then it seems he has to give up his libertarianism. Or he can maintain his libertarianism and reject the PSR. I suppose he could reject both, but that doesn't seem like a yeah. At least one thing has to go, or at least I try to put pressure on him to give up one or the other, or some other alternative would have to be thrown into the mix. It doesn't look like it's very plausible to maintain both his principle of sufficient reason and his account of libertarian free will.
After that, you kind of try to steelman the argument and also try to assume some of the possible replies that could be made to this. So, and there are two responses, I believe, in the paper. So, possible responses that might come from Pruss. So, walk us through that and give us a hint of what's going on in what you're entertaining to be the possible reply.
Yeah, so as I was reading Pruss on this topic, he has a wealth of replies available. I tried to pick out what I took were his strongest, and they are a little complicated, but let's see. Yeah, the first stage, we can summarize his response as coming in two stages. So maybe the first stage would be to deny that contrastive statements or claims like why A rather than B, or that A rather than B, that there's really anything more there than just what's logically present in the statement. So I see him as applying a sort of reductionism to contrastive claims, where he wants to say, when I ask you why A rather than B, the claim at issue is why A rather than B, but he wants to reduce that to merely A and not B. So that's really all I'm asking is this an explanation of the statement of A and not B, because A rather than B is going to end up being logically equivalent to, at least in this bare logical reductionist view, it's just A and not B. And so the second stage of his response would be to say that he can explain contrastive propositions like that, by basically saying that once he's explained why A is true, and why, and once we see that A is incompatible with B, we can then see that he has explained contrastive propositions. But I'm inclined to think that a lot of this is not very successful, but I'll let, maybe before I get into the reply to that, we can follow it up with any questions that you might have.
I don't want to give away too much because we're not in the section of the of our talk yet, of the episode, but it seems to me that the reducing these kind of logical possibilities in the logical space is basically where the first part is going. But the second one seems to me to be another same strategy too. It's not further than that. I think both strategies are trying to curtail the possibilities of what's logically in the space of possible things to do. Am I right?
I think so. I think I would say so.
Let's go with the first one, trying to say A and not B. How do you see the status of this response?
Well, I think both stages are problematic, or they don't seem very, very convincing to me. And what Pruss is trying to do by presenting these two stages would be to resist the pressure that he needs contrastive explanation of contrastive propositions generated by his account of free will. So it'd be a way of circumventing and avoiding the pressure that I try to apply to him with the inexplicability argument. So his first stage is basically to deny that a contrastive claim expresses a proposition with any more content than determined by its like structure and parts. Anything else that's there when I pose the question why A rather than B, why did you choose a salad rather than French fries? He thinks that there's like a context of utterance when those sorts of claims are made. And what we get distracted by is that context around the proposition. And when he's giving an account of an explanation of some fact, it's really just the simple proposition, strip away the context, and just explain why salad and not French fries. So once he can explain why, you chose the salad and not French fries, and he can show that, you couldn't have ordered both the salad and French fries, then he can explain why you chose the salad, why you freely chose it. That's his basic response. But I think that's implausible because we can, at least to the first stage, when I'm asking why A rather than B, or why the salad rather than the French fries, that context can be relevant because those are propositions that can be joined together to get a bigger proposition, a bigger claim that we want explained. So when I'm asking why you freely chose A rather than B, or why the salad rather than French fries, we can also link that up to other propositions like, immediately prior to your free choice, you were equally impressed by the reasons for salad and French fries, and the reasons why you are impressed for the salad and the French fries is going to end up being like, or how to put it another way, the extent to which you choose one thing rather than another is going to be a function of how impressed you are by the reasons for your choices. So the reasons that you have to choose salad and the reasons that you have for choosing French fries, however that ends up, it's always going to be a function of the degree to which you're impressed by reasons for one and the other. So the long story short, when you have this context and you make your free choice, we can basically generate a bigger proposition or claim that's in need of explanation that would basically pose a problem for Pruss because we're no longer just talking about in isolation why one thing is true rather than the other, but why that is so when we also know that you choose for reasons that you're impressed by, but also that you're equally impressed by the reasons to choose salad and French fries. So then it still ends up being a problem and a mystery why you would choose salad rather than French fries. There's nothing to really clear that up according to Pruss's account.
Right, and also you should keep in mind that you can, depending on the logical space of what you're entertaining in your mind, you can, or anyone really can, utilize this and add different cases and propositions to that, or possible other propositions prior to choosing. So you could just go basically nuts with this when it comes to some of the cases. I'm getting excited because this is going to this is going a bit forward. We're going to talk about how I'm going to use this. I think this is just such a nice point. But better, let me not get ahead of myself and move to the second part of the reply. Why don't you find that convincing?
Yeah, so this is it's a little bit more complicated why I find his second stage unconvincing. But he basically wants to say that he doesn't need contrastive explanations to have the truth explained for a contrastive proposition, like why did I freely choose one thing rather than the other. And for this, I mostly appeal to an analogy throughout the paper, Archimedes Scale, to point out like a parody almost of to show how his reply, once you build this analogy with Archimedes Scale, it ends up being implausible, and so we should reject his second stage. And the basic idea of the Archimedes Scale, to preface this, would be it's an example from Leibniz that he gives, where he asks us to suppose that there's a scale with equal weights at both ends of the scale or the balance, and we can also suppose that the arms of the balance of the scale are equally distant. So you have maybe like 1 pound of iron in the other and 1 pound of iron in the other side of the scale. And since there's no more reason why the scale should tip one way or the other, because everything is equal on both sides, everything is alike on both sides, there's no more reason for the scale to move one way or the other. There's simply no explanation for why it would move one way or the other, so it should just remain at rest. It shouldn't do anything. And what I think Pruss is doing is when he's formulating his view of free will, it's sort of like him saying, suppose that Archimedean scale example, there are equal weights on each side, the arms of the balance are equally long, everything is exactly alike on both sides, and what he seems to be doing is when you freely choose, it's like the balance moving one way or the other, or tipping one way or the other. And what he's doing is he's saying he can explain why that's so because of, for example, like it tipped on one side and not the other because of the weight on the one side. There's 1 pound of iron on that side. That's an analogy to the weight of reasons to choose that salad rather than the French fries. And sure, it's incompatible. One side of the weight moving is incompatible with the other side moving in that same way, we can suppose. But it still seems very implausible why that should be so when everything is equal on the other side. Just because he's offered maybe at best a partial explanation of why the scale moved on one side, it doesn't really explain the bigger picture of how the scale can move, in the first place, given that everything is explicable.
What I like about this objection is that it's really all over the place once you can get a hang of it. Now, obviously, what I'm saying needs more content.
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly a lot of interesting conclusions that generate once you start applying, at least a certain sort of a demand for contrastive explanation for any agent, God or human being, in a certain situation where they have options to choose. You start thinking about what that would mean for God to make his choice about which world to create, or for human beings for that matter. I think you're gonna end up with a lot of interesting content to for theists to think about, for atheists to think about. And I don't think there's maybe going to be any one view that's, at least to my knowledge, one view that's going to be free of all the uncomfortable sort of situations. If we're going to open up speculation about God's choice, it may end up being something like a Pandora's box, or which is maybe why some theists refuse to speculate about that. But then I think that's maybe at odds with the whole rationalist sort of sentiment that so many theists enjoy. So they feel maybe like they have to engage in at least a little speculation there. But
So
yeah.
I haven't asked you that yet. Where do you see yourself in the spectrum? Do you feel most close to pantheists, or maybe panentheists, or somewhere in between of naturalism and pantheism, or unrestricted free agent?
Yeah, so I would say really over the past few years, I find myself being embracing more and more of this Socratic ignorance, or at least this is a result of my studying more and more philosophy. There's just less and less I know the more I do philosophy. But I've been attracted to various aspects of theism, but also various aspects of naturalism. And what I like about theism is the more metaphysical bits about there being an explanation for why there's something rather than nothing. I think this is a good question, and it should have an answer and a satisfactory metaphysics. But I also like naturalism. I guess it depends on what sort of naturalism we're talking about. It's a very broad general term, but I like the idea that everything's basically governed by general metaphysical principles or laws of nature. Appeal to supernatural activity might look suspiciously like an appeal to something that looks like magic, and that seems inconsistent with the scientific spirit and the demand for explanation. So what is one to do when you find aspects of both theism and naturalism attractive? Well, that's where I think Spinoza offers a view of the world, a monistic, sort of pantheistic. I guess it could be panentheistic, depending how we cash it out. But he offers a view that it combines various elements of naturalism and theism together. I guess the theists would say, no, it's just an atheistic naturalism. That would be their view of maybe Spinozism. But I think there's elements of both in Spinoza's view, and Albert Einstein, a big lover of Spinoza, also found it attractive to sort of unite everything in this single substance that Spinoza identified as God or nature. That's where I would say I'm inclined to find the truth if I would have to put money down on anything. But at the end of the day, I would say ultimately I don't know exactly, but that's where I would be inclined or swayed.
The more I'm reading about pantheism, the more attracting it gets, specifically when it comes to axiology. I mean, the literature, okay, granted, the axiology literature is young, recent, and not that much systematic at least. But even the existing part, I think, if I had to, most of the time I have to think about this or talk to people about meaning, values, and so on in an atheistic and theistic world. But to be honest, if I had to choose and say which worldview, or at least big picture as it were, is committed to the best axiological consideration, I think I would put my money on pantheism first. And there seems to be some sort of appeal to that. As I mentioned, Eric Steinhardt and a few others are trying to utilize just those goods of pantheism. And Eugene Nagasawa says that actually these kinds of adaptations that are entering to these kind of new, recently formed naturalisms are actually more powerful when it comes to normative considerations. So yeah, I also find this to be really attractive. Now, Brandon also mentioned something, and we're not going to give away more than that, but just remember that Brandon has an up-and-coming paper, hopefully. Is there anything you can tell us about the paper before we finish this?
Well, I drafted the paper. The paper is dealing with Spinoza and defending his necessitarianism from various objections to necessitarianism, about how if you are a necessitarian, how can your view be serviceable to make various distinctions between, for example, like essences and accidents, or laws of nature and accidental generalizations. A draft of that paper where I respond on Spinoza's behalf, but it bears a lot of resemblance to, in connection to current PSR literature. A draft of that can be found in my dissertation, which I think can be found online now. I think it came out and was made available online. And the title of my dissertation is "It is of the nature of reason to regard things as necessary, not as contingent, a defense of Spinoza's necessitarianism." And it's in the final chapter there that I explore those themes, but it's still a work in progress, and hopefully I look to improve it and maybe get it published at some point. But that at least would be a starting point for anyone interested in reading more on the topic.
And you should be. And talking about Spinoza, I'm going to end this with a perfect quote, I think, from Spinoza. "What altar of refuge can a man find when he commits treason against the majesty of reason?"
Yes.
Thank you, Brandon, for being with us and accepting my invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to be on here, and I'm very thankful for the invitation and opportunity to discuss anything related to PSR and Spinoza and philosophy in general.